First and foremost, I would like to discuss several aspects of German pronunciation that are likely going to be very different in your native language. First of all, we have the 5 basic vowels. It is very likely that these are going to be used in your language as well in one form or another. We pronounce them as A, A, O, O, U, U, E, E, I, I, A, O, U, E, I. Not too difficult until here, right? Where it gets a little bit more complicated is with those vowels that in German we call Umlaute. It is actually the basic vowels A, O, and U, but with 2 dots on top of them, which slightly change the way in which they are pronounced. We speak them like Ä, Ä, Ö, Ö, Ü, Ü. The primary difference to the basic A, O, and U vowels will be easier for you to understand if I speak them in pairs to contrast one against the other. A, Ä. One more time. A, Ä. The second pair is O, Ö, O, Ö. And the third one is U, Ü, U, Ü. According to the students I have worked with so far, this last pair seems to be the most complicated one. I will speak all of them one more time. Please practice and speak after me. A, Ä, O, Ö, U, Ü. Don't worry too much if you can't pronounce them perfectly yet. It will come the more often you practice. Just give yourself the time and practice on a regular basis. Furthermore, there are a couple of vowel combinations that have a very specific way of pronunciation in German. For example, the combination of A and U. Au, au. We have studied, for example, the word auch, auch. Another frequent combination is the combination of I and U, which we pronounce like oi, oi. For example, in the word heute, heute. Furthermore, we have the combination of I and I, which is pronounced like I, as in the word Zeitung, Zeitung. Another consonant combination that we have been studying in the previous lessons is the combination of C and H. This combination is pronounced differently depending on the vowels that they are combined with. After lighter vowels like I or E, for example, we will pronounce them very softly. Sh, sh, as in ich, ich. However, the combination of S, C, and H is going to be pronounced like a very sharp and full sh sound, a very strong S. Sh, as in the word schön, schön. And last but not least, we have CH again. This time, however, after a darker vowel like A, O, or U, you will pronounce it further in the back of your throat. Needs to be a little bit scratchy. An example we have been studying for this type of vowel combination, consonant combination, would be Nacht, Nacht. I will read the example words one more time for you. Please speak after me. Auch, heute, Zeitung, ich, schön, Nacht. Also, in the first 4 lessons of this sequence, you will have noticed that German nouns can have 1 or 3 possible genders. We differentiate between masculine, feminine, and neuter nouns. However, whether a noun is masculine, feminine, or neuter doesn't necessarily have anything to do with whether the human being or the animal or the object that is spoken about has any resemblance with something masculine, feminine, or neuter. So with every new piece of vocabulary that we study, I strongly advise you to study with it the appropriate article. For masculine nouns, we will be using the article der. Some example nouns that we have studied already are, for example, der Tag or der Park, both of which are masculine nouns, der. For feminine nouns, we will use the definite article die, die. For example, as in die Nacht or die Küche. Neuter nouns, however, use the definite article das, das, as we have studied, for example, in das Wetter or das Bett. Another aspect of German grammar that for now I would like you to please just study as it is without necessarily understanding every single aspect of the grammatical logic behind, because for this grammar we use the German dative case. We will be speaking about cases a little bit later in the sequence of these lessons. However, I would like you to understand that there is a difference when we differentiate between masculine nouns, feminine nouns, and neuter nouns, how we need to apply these nouns in order to talk about a location. For example, in the park, because it is a masculine noun, in German we will say im Park, which is a contraction of 2 separate words, in as a preposition, and dem is the definite article in the dative case for masculine nouns. When we contract both together, in dem will become im Park, in the park. In the case of a feminine noun, there is no such contraction, which is why we use the preposition as it is, in, and then the feminine version of a definite article changes from die to der in dative case. So when we want to say in the kitchen, we will say in der Küche. Neuter nouns share the same appearance as masculine nouns with regards to this grammar. Here again, we contract the preposition in with the dative case of the definite article das, which is the same as in the masculine version, in dem, which then becomes im. In bed or in the bed will then be im Bett. Im Bett. We will be talking about dative and accusative and genitive case at a later point in this lesson, so please don't concern yourself about the details of this grammar. For now, please try to just learn it somewhat by heart so you can use it and apply it and understand it in depth at a later point in time. In the first 4 lessons, we have also been studying German personal pronouns in singular so far. Plurals will come a bit later as well. You will remember that German personal pronouns are going to be ich, du, sie, es, which correspond in English to I, you, he, she, and it as direct equivalents. We are going to use German personal pronouns when we want to talk about verb conjugations. You might have noticed that German verbs are conjugated based on singular and plural, as well as first, second, or third person. So the verbs are going to look a little bit different depending on who we are talking about as the subject of the sentence. The first verb that is always very important to study in any language is the verb to be, which in German is sein. The infinitive is pronounced as sein. This verb is very irregular, which means it changes its verb stem forms depending on its conjugations. So when we conjugate the verb sein for the first, second, and third person singular, because those are the personal pronouns that we can already use, we will get ich bin, du bist, er ist, sie ist, es ist. So you can tell we do not differentiate between masculine, feminine, and neutral. All of them have the same form as the third person singular. Ich bin, du bist, er, sie, es ist. Until now, we have been studying one regular German verb. I would like to use the conjugations of this verb to show you how future regular verbs will need to be adjusted when you put them in the first, second, and third person of singular or plural. So again, we have our personal pronouns on the left, and we have the various verb conjugations of the verb bleiben, to stay, bleiben, where you can see that we eliminate the ending en of the German infinitive. Here you can recognize German infinitive verbs always use the ending en. We will eliminate that ending, and then we will have the verb stem, which in this case is bleib, bleib. And to this verb stem, we will then add the corresponding endings of the first, second, and third person, which are st and t. So the final result of this verb will be ich bleibe, du bleibst, du bleibst, er, sie, es bleibt, bleibt. We will study many more regular and also many more irregular verbs in the upcoming 5 to 10 lessons. Certainly, one of the most complicated aspects of German grammar is German sentence structure, which depends on so many different factors and grammatical aspects that might seem a bit overwhelming at first. However, they all do follow a certain logic. In this grammar revision lesson, I would like to introduce to you 4 basic sentence structure types. We will start with type A, or type number 1, which is the simple combination of a subject and a predicate. Maybe if you're not too familiar with the grammatical terms, you might know it more familiarly as a verb. An example sentence would, for example, be Das Wetter ist schön. Das Wetter ist schön. So if we analyze this sentence, we can identify the subject of the sentence, which is the weather, das Wetter, and the remainder of the sentence is going to be our predicate. And here you can tell that simply calling it a verb doesn't quite get it right, because in this case the predicate is composed of 2 particular elements. One of them is the copula, as we call it in German, which is a form of the verb to be, plus in this case an adjective, schön, nice or beautiful. So the weather is nice is a combination of a subject and a predicate, which in turn is a combination of the copula, to be, plus an adjective. Or it could also be another noun, for example, as in the sentence, I am Maria. Ich bin Maria. So it would be the combination of a copula and a proper name or another noun. Furthermore, another example would be the sentence Es ist warm. Here, instead of a noun as a subject, we use a pronoun as the subject, which is exactly the function of a pronoun. It can replace a noun in its function in a sentence. So es is the subject of the sentence. Ist warm, again, is going to be our predicate, consisting of the copula to be, and again, an adjective. So we have two different examples of sentence structure type A, subject plus predicate. The second type of sentence structure that I would like to show you today, type B, is a combination of subject plus predicate plus an object, which is pretty much the same order in which also English sentences are being composed. For example, you could say in German, Ich mag den Winter, which in English is going to be I like the winter. Same structure, same sentence order. Here we have a personal pronoun, me or I, as the subject of the sentence. Here in this case, our predicate really is only just a verb. It is a transitive verb, which requires a direct object. So our direct object in this example sentence is den Winter, which in German is accusative case. So we change der Winter, masculine, to den Winter in accusative. You do not need to understand yet how to form this yourself. Only bear in mind that we will have different grammatical cases depending on whether we use a noun as a subject or as the object of a sentence. In this case, it is an object, so we use it in accusative case. Ich mag den Winter. Subject, predicate, object. The predicate being a transitive verb with a direct object. Another example sentence would be Du liest ein Buch. Same structure, same logic. Du, you, is the subject of our sentence. Liest, in this case, is our predicate, which is, again, a verb with a direct object in accusative case. And the noun that we are putting in accusative case here is ein Buch, a book, the object of our sentence. And here is where it gets really tricky, because as soon as we add a type of adverbial to a German sentence, usually it changes the rest of the sentence structure quite significantly. Adverbials, for example, can be adverbials of time or adverbials of place, meaning some sort of specification where the action described in the sentence is taking place or when it is taking place. Examples in English would be, for example, yesterday as a typical adverbial of time, or outside as a typical adverbial of place. Adverbials can be single individual words like yesterday or outside, or combinations of words that together denominate a place or a time. For example, earlier this week is an adverbial of time. In the morning, again, is an adverbial of time, a word combination constituting an adverbial. Or even more complicated, it can be entire phrases. For example, when I was a child, or where we met for the first time, as two examples of an adverbial of time and of place. So these are the two types that you have been confronted with in the first 4 lessons, yet we will add several more in the upcoming lessons. So, as soon as we add an adverbial to our sentence, it will have the following effect on our sentence structure. Example type C. We can put the adverbial in the first position of a sentence, which we do quite often. Then this will change the order of the rest of the sentence. So instead of subject, predicate, object, as in type B, we will now have adverbial, predicate, subject, and maybe object or not. The object can be optional. I will show you using an example. We can say, for example, heute lese ich. Today I'm reading. We have in the first position of the sentence the adverbial of time, today, heute. And then instead of saying ich lese, as in a regular sentence of type B, we invert the predicate and the subject and say heute lese ich. Lese being the predicate and ich being the subject of the sentence. So pay attention here. if a personal pronoun or a noun is positioned at the end of the sentence, it does not necessarily mean that it is an object. It can also be the subject, so watch out for the positions of adverbials and predicates in this context. This was an example of a sentence type adverbial predicate subject. We can add another object just to clarify the difference. Again, we have in the first position of the sentence the adverbial of time, heute. Lese ich, again the inversion of predicate and subject instead of subject and predicate. However, the object, the book, remains at the end of the sentence. So we say, heute lese ich ein Buch. This is one of the simplest ways to explain how adverbials can affect sentence structure. There are several other positions in a sentence where you can find an adverbial. And also sometimes, depending on the position, we can highlight that we're talking about yesterday and not today, that we did something. Or you can also put the object in the beginning of the sentence to state very clearly that it was a book that we were reading and not the newspaper. However, this type of grammar is going to come at a much later point in time. For now, please just notice that adverbials will affect the position of subject versus predicate in contrast to a normal sentence of type B. So now you might say, wait, hold on a minute. We have had several example sentences in lesson 1 to 4 where the adverbial was not in the first position of the sentence, but somewhere in the middle. So let's have a brief look at this just for you to understand the difference. However, you do not yet need to be able to apply it yourself. Just take a mental note so you can recognize it whenever you find this phenomenon in later example sentences. So here again, you see type C that we have just been discussing. And I would like to introduce to you one alternative of where an adverbial might stand. So in type D, the last type of sentence structure that I'm going to introduce to you today, we will have in the very classical sense again, subject, predicate, after the predicate, the adverbial, and then optionally the object of the sentence. So those are the most typical two positions where you can find an adverbial in a sentence, either in the beginning of it or immediately after the verb or the predicate. It could look, for example, like this. Ich lese manchmal ein Buch. I sometimes read a book. Here we have, as in the typical sentence structure type B, the subject in the first place of the sentence, ich. Lese immediately after it as the predicate of the sentence. Now we define more closely how or when or where we are doing the reading activity, which is the activity of the sentence, putting the adverb of time or mode or place or any other type of adverbial immediately after the predicate. Manchmal, I sometimes read. In English it is the opposite, as you can tell. We say, I read sometimes a book. Ein Buch being the object of the sentence. So if you compare up with a typical sentence of type C, as soon as you put the adverbial after the predicate, it is again the subject being in the first place of the sentence. Another example sentence would be, Du sitzt nie im Park. Here we are going to define when, how, where, how often, in what way someone is sitting where. So we have the subject, first position, du. Sitzt as our predicate. Now we more closely define sitting, sitzen, being never in this case, an adverbial of time. Du sitzt nie. You never sit. In the park being another adverbial. You can use as many of them in one sentence as you like. Just at some point it becomes a little bit unelegant. But from a grammatical standpoint, you can add as many adverbials to a sentence as you wish. They just need to follow a certain specific order. So in this case, we have an adverbial of time and an adverbial of place. Du sitzt nie im Park. And this is already as complicated as it gets for the first revision lesson. Don't worry if all of this looks quite complicated to you and if grammar is maybe not what you came for or what you're looking for. And I can promise you I will add on this sentence structure, those 4 types that I've showed you today, in the next revision lesson, and we can keep expanding our grammatical knowledge step by step until it is going to come very natural to you. You have also already learned how to use negation in a sentence. Interestingly, in German, we use a different way to negate verbs and adjectives as opposed to negating nouns. You have not yet learned how to negate nouns. This is also going to be coming a bit later. For now, let's revise how to negate a verb or an adjective in a sentence. You might remember from our example sentences in the first 4 lessons that we use the word nicht to negate verbs or adjectives. Typical examples could look like Ich esse nicht. I don't eat. You negate the verb by putting nicht at the end of the sentence. Ich mag das Buch nicht. Here again, we negate the verb mögen, to like. We add the object in between, and nicht remains at the end of the sentence. I like the book not. Might sound a bit funny to you, however, this is how we do in German. Ich mag das Buch nicht. So remember, when negating verbs, we put nicht at the end of the entire sentence. In contrast, however, when we negate an adjective, we still use the same word, nicht. However, we put it in front of the adjective that we want to negate. So when we say, der Winter ist nicht warm, the winter is not warm, you do not put it at the end of the sentence, you put it immediately in front of the adjective. So here again, sentence structure plays an important role. However, what all of them have in common is using the same word for the negation, nicht. Ich esse nicht. Ich mag das Buch nicht. Der Winter ist nicht warm. Many more examples of this are going to follow in the coming lessons. We have also learned how to formulate simple yes and no questions as opposed to the W questions, which we're also going to speak about in about a minute. So in order to form a typical yes-no question in English, you use do you like, yes or no. Did you read, yes or no. In German, we do it a little bit differently. You know, for example, a simple statement is composed of type B sentence structure. Du bleibst im Haus. You stay in the house or at home. If you want to formulate this statement as a yes-no question, do you stay in the house? We invert subject and predicate of the sentence and put a question mark at the end. So instead of saying du bleibst, we will say bleibst du. The complete question would then be bleibst du im Haus? Another example would be isst in der Küche. He's eating in the kitchen. In order to formulate this statement in a yes-no question type of sentence, we will invert subject and predicate, isst, and make it into ist in der Küche? Question mark. Ist in der Küche? Question mark. And we can then answer with ja or nein as the most simple response to a yes-no question. If, however, now, as opposed to a simple yes-no question, we would like to ask a more open-ended question, in German we call them one of the W questions, we need to use a question word similar to English. In German, these question words are wann, wer, wo, wie, was, und warum, corresponding referring to when, who, where, how, what, and why. So what we need to do in order to formulate one of these questions is, first of all, we need to look at the statement and analyze and identify which part of the sentence we actually want to inquire about. In this particular example, du bleibst im Haus, you stay in the house or you stay at home. There are 3 possibilities of what we might ask more information about. You could say, who stays in the house? What do you do in the house? Or where do you stay? In this particular case, we want to ask about the location, im Haus. In order to do this, we need to put the question word for location, wo, in front of the sentence in the very first position, and then we again invert the subject and the predicate, same as we did in the yes-no question type. And then we have the complete question asking about a location of an activity. Here, wo bleibst du? Wo bleibst du? And the answer to this question will then not be yes or no, but im Haus. Im Haus. Let's look at another example. In the sentence, sitzt morgens im Garten, which means he sits in the garden every morning or in the mornings, there are several options what part of the sentence we might ask about. We could say, who sits in the garden every morning? What does he do in the garden every morning? When does he sit in the garden? And where does he sit every morning? In this particular case, we would like to inquire about the time and ask, when does he sit in the garden? So we need to use the question word for time, which in German is wann. We put this question word in the beginning of the sentence, then we invert subject and predicate and leave the rest of the sentence as it was before, adding a question mark at the end of it. So our final result is then, wann sitzt im Garten? Wann sitzt im Garten? With the answer being morgens. Morgens. So let's practice this particular type of W question a little bit more. Here is one example question and answer for each type of W question word. Wann ist das Wetter schön? Im Sommer. Wer sitzt im Park? Ich. Wo ist er? In der Küche. Wie ist das Buch? Schön. Was liest du? Die Zeitung. Warum bleibst du drinnen? Weil es draußen kalt ist. You will notice that in the case of a why question, the situation becomes a little bit more complicated because instead of one particular noun or noun combination, like die Zeitung or in der Küche, here we have an entire phrase that has its very own logic in terms of sentence structure. This will also be explained at a later point in time, so please don't worry about the precise details. Just notice that in order to answer a warum question, we normally need to answer with an entire phrase or sentence. So far in terms of grammar. Now let's go over to some more vocabulary revision. Last but not least, for our revision lesson of today, I have grouped and summarized for you all of the items of vocabulary that you have been studying throughout lessons 1 to 4. I am grouping them here in terms of their grammatical function, starting with the nouns, which in German we call Nomen. I will only read them for you one time. In case you have forgotten some of the translations, please go back to the respective lessons in which they were taught. But I believe you will already passively have understood the meaning of those nouns, even if you might not yet be able to recollect them actively. So the nouns we have studied in the first 4 lessons are der Winter, der Sommer, der Tag, die Nacht, das Wetter, der Freund, das Buch, die Zeitung, der Park, das Haus, der Garten, das Bett und die Küche. Next in our list are the pronouns, which can replace a noun in their grammatical function in a sentence. We have studied ich, du, er, sie, es in terms of personal pronouns. In terms of question pronouns, we have wer, wann, was, wo, wie und warum. The verbs that we have studied so far are primarily irregular verbs. Here we repeat the infinitive versions one more time. Mögen, sein, bleiben, this was our regular verb, sitzen, lesen, schlafen und essen. The adverbs we have studied so far, Adverben, are heute, morgen, drinnen, draußen, morgens, abends, immer, manchmal, nie, gern und auch. Next in our list, we have the adjectives, Adjektive, which are warm, kalt, hell, dunkel, schön. There are also a couple of conjunctions, Konjunktionen, which are aber und and weil. And last but not least, negating particles, in this particular case, Partikel, nein und nicht. Those have been all the words that you have been studying in lessons 1 through 4.